when Yeshua comes and he's calling his disciples and he sees Nathanael, where's Nathanael? Hiding under a fig tree. Now there was a way in which the fig trees grow in Israel, and they kind of like a weeping willow. I don't know if you ever had a fort under a tree when you were a kid.
Well, that would be cool.
Huh?
That would be cool.
It is cool, and it is
Forts
cool.
and
And I used to find, when we went to camp in Prescott Pines, there were some trees that had grown, kind of the branches were big and they kind of dropped down around. And you could find, if you could get in between two branches, you could get in the middle and there would be this dry area, even in the rain, even in nice and dry, and you could sit there and nobody knew you were there.
Mine was in rhododendrons.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It was cool.
So I used to love being able to hide and study the Word and hide and pray and just hide and write poetry and hide and read a good book, you know?
Oh, man.
I kind of joked about the idea that when I write my autobiography, it's going to say I traveled the world in my father's attic. Because I used to climb up in the attic and read all these books about things all over the world, and I literally would climb up in the attic, and then I would pull, you know, it had one of those ladders that came down and you could pull it up, you know,
Yeah.
and I would sit up there with my flashlight and I would read and read and read and read, and I'd be there for hours. Sometimes I think, did my mother, as an adult I wondered, did my mother know for sure that's where I was? Because, you know, I'd be up there for hours. But there's this place that Yeshua said, I saw you when you were hiding under that fig tree, Nathanael. I saw where you were. God sees us where we are. Yeshua sees us where we are. When he looked at Israel out of Egypt, and he brought them from Egypt out, in Hosea it tells us that he brought them out with nothing, but with a prophet. With the prophetic word and a prophet. He brought them out. He led them through the wilderness. He kept them fed. But when they got into their own land and started doing the work to provide for themselves the way we're supposed to do, they forgot that it was God who gives the increase. You know, a farmer can plant all he wants. If God doesn't give the increase, there's no crop. The crop has to come from God. The increase comes from God. And we have to understand that. We have to understand that. God says, return to me. Don't stumble anymore. Bring your words. Bring your words. And bring your actions. Ask, you know, ask for God's forgiveness. But change your actions. Don't look to these other gods anymore. Don't look at other things. Look to me. I'm your provider. I am the one who brought you up. I am your God. He saw Israel. He saw Ephraim. He saw the differences. He saw what was going on. He saw all of that. And he sent prophets to them to say, hey, guys, judgment is coming because you have not honored me. You've walked out from under my blessing. When we walk out from under the blessing of God, judgment happens. In our story, the thing that jumped out at me this week, the more I read it, the more I saw this one thing. Just one thing. Jacob left his father's house with nothing. Right? He left with nothing. He had his cloak that he used to cushion himself on the rock, and he fell asleep, and God gave him a dream. And he saw the ladder going up, you know, and I mean, there are songs about that, you know, we are climbing Jacob's ladder, right? The whole idea that God, there's this connection between heaven and earth. And I've heard all kinds of crazy things preached on this subject, you know, I got to tell you, it's been from things like, you know, Jacob didn't realize that the ladder was with him all the time, to the and I'm like, wait a minute. He's in a specific place for a specific purpose, and God chose that place to show him this is where the angels of God ascend and descend. It had nothing to do with Jacob. It had everything to do with God and his provision. And that's why he names the place. I've actually heard preachers say that, if he had realized it, he took that thing, he took that blessing with him everywhere he went. Well, maybe, but not in the same way. Jacob said to God, when you are my God. This is the house of God. This is the place of God. This place here is where God's anointing, where God's authority is. And in this place, I will come back to worship you. If. Did you catch the if? Jacob goes out with nothing. And he makes a bargain with God. And the thing that gets me is that God honored it. God honored that. I am Adonai, the God of Abraham, your grandfather, the God of Isaac, your father. The land that you are lying on, I'm going to give to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the grains of the dust on the earth. You will expand to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south. By you and your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I am with you. I will guard you wherever you go. I will bring you back into this land because I won't leave you until I have done what I have promised. Is that conditional upon Jacob? Does God give Jacob a condition on there? No, he says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. Period. I will do this. Jacob woke up and said, truly, the Lord is in this place. I didn't even know it. I didn't recognize it. This place is awesome. This has to be the house of God, the gate of heaven. Now, some Jewish commentaries will say this is the very place that Isaac had been offered on the altar. Some will say this is the very place that the temple is built later. So, I mean, there's all kinds of interesting parallels and connections, and some will say, well, in the land, it's over here, and it's over here. And there's all these different ideas about where this place is. But what I want us to recognize right now, regardless of what the actual location was, when Jacob left with nothing, God met him. He left out of obedience. He left with nothing, and God met him. And God made a promise to him. And Jacob responded to that promise and said, surely, God, if you will do these things, then when I come back, you will be my God. Doesn't say you are my God. I find that interesting. He took a vow. If God will be with me and will guard me in this road that I'm traveling, give me bread to eat and clothes to wear so that I return to my father's house in peace, then Adonai will be my God. I mean, he's not already. The stone that I've set up as a standing stone will be God's house, and of everything you give me, I will faithfully return 1/10 to you. Okay, tithe. It predates the law. It predates Moses. So those people that tell you that the tithe is, tithe is part of the commandments of Moses, no, it predates it. Abraham earlier had given a tenth, a tithe, to Melchizedek. A tenth here, it's a standard, it was a standard thing. When you wanted to honor, you gave a tenth. And continuing his journey, he came to the land of the people of the east. Now, I know that Tammy, when she talked to you, she talked about the well that the servant found Rebecca at. She talked about that word, that well means a spring. It's not a deep dug well necessarily. It's a spring where the water bubbles up. This is the same well. It's the same well. There's a place where they went to water their sheep There's a stone over the top of it that kind of caps it, so it's capped. But it's a spring, where when you take the cap off, the water comes out. You don't have to dig for it. You're not having to throw the bucket down in it. It simply was capped. It's the same type of thing. It's the same well, I believe. It's the same word in Hebrew. A natural spring. And so he comes to that spring where his mother was found, and he finds himself his own wife. He left with nothing. He goes, he meets a wife, he makes a vow, he meets his wife, he gets all this stuff, and God blesses him tremendously. But it wasn't always easy. He worked for that blessing. He worked for that blessing, and yet he continued to acknowledge that it was God who was blessing him. Even though he worked, even though he manipulated things or seemed to. The whole story about the speckled, the branches and all of that stuff, it seems as if he's trying to manipulate things for his own benefit, but even in doing all of that, he still, in the long run, acknowledges the blessing is from God. He left with nothing. He returns with everything. When he left, he made a vow to God that he would return if God blessed him. As he leaves, he makes a vow to Laban, I will not come back. I will not come back. Sometimes when we leave and we obey God, we have to remember there's a second part to that. We go where God directs us, but there's times also that God says, okay, now it's time to move. It's time to move. It's time to move. Don't go back. And that's what happens here. He left with nothing. He returns with everything. He leaves. He makes a vow to God, says, I will return. When he returns, he makes a vow to the world he is leaving. He says, I'm not coming back here for any harm. I'm going to go and honor my God. I'm going to go and honor my God. And when he does that, God meets him. God meets him. And he recognizes, again, the angels of God. Just as he did when he first left. This whole time he's out and about, he's doing all these things, he's working hard. I mean, he says that Laban changed his wages, how many times? 10 times? He worked hard for the blessing of God. And he didn't leave until God said he was to leave. He did not move until God said to move. He didn't leave until God said to leave. He left his mother's house with nothing. He returns with everything. The story of the gods, the household gods, it's kind of an interesting little twist that I heard this last couple of weeks, listening to, what is his name? He's working on a big series about the house of God that's just phenomenal. We heard him at conferences last summer. Anyway, he was talking about this whole thing about the household gods. And sometimes, and I've read commentaries that really, really look down on Rachel because she stole the gods. And there's all kinds of fanciful ideas about why she would steal Laban's household gods. What was she doing? What was she thinking? Is she planning on worshiping these gods? And it was interesting as I was listening. In the ancient Near East, each house had their own representation of the gods that were of their house and over their house. And those gods represented their inheritance. Those gods represented their inheritance. When a wife marries and goes into another household, she goes to the husband's gods. She's going to be receiving the inheritance her husband has earned. Her husband's inheritance now falls to her. And the prior inheritance of her father's house goes to her brothers. When Rachel stole the household gods, took them with her, she was saying something profound that had nothing to do with idolatry. It had everything to do with the idea that my father's inheritance has passed to my husband. I'm taking these to represent that. Laban's inheritance, the inheritance of her father, and we see it in the sheep and in the goats and in the wealth and all of that stuff. The inheritance that had been given to Laban transfers over, right, to Jacob. And when she took the gods, that's what she was showing. That in a very real sense, the inheritance that had been given to the father has transferred back. It's a really different concept, isn't it? It's not one I'd ever heard before. And I thought, you know, sometimes when we read these things, we read it out of the context of the culture. We don't always understand it. Jacob knew it was time to leave when he started noticing Laban's sons complaining that what our father had seems to be going to Jacob. Their inheritance was being lost. Part of the reason I believe their inheritance was being lost was because Laban was not honoring the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's part of the relative. He's part of the factor. He could be doing that. He could have shifted. He could have done that. But he didn't. And God is showing in all of this, look, I called Abraham out of here. I called your family out of here. You should be following them. All the nations of the earth are to be blessed by the sons of Jacob, sons and daughters of Jacob. All the nations of the earth were to be blessed by the sons and daughters of Abraham. All the nations. That meant Laban could have chosen blessing. But he didn't. Instead, the inheritance that had been his through his father, who is Abraham's brother, they're all related, ends up being taken from him and given to Jacob. And when they left and Rachel stole the household gods, she was showing that she saw that the inheritance has been transferred. The inheritance belongs to the one who honors God. God honors Jacob because Jacob honors God. God honors Jacob because he honors God. God honored Israel because she honored God. When she stopped honoring God as a nation, the blessing stopped over Israel. When Ephraim, the northern kingdom, stopped honoring God as a nation, set up their own days of worship, their own times, their own gods, literally put up their own altar in their own courtyard away from Jerusalem. Everyone that wants to be of the house of Ephraim, I warn you, be careful. Ephraim did some really wrong things. Ephraim as a group worshipped and went after a different God, said we are better than Judah and we will do this our way. And God judged Ephraim for that. As we return to the roots of the faith of Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, let's not make the same mistakes. Let's return with honoring to Judah. Let's return recognizing Jerusalem. Let's return recognizing the blessing of God, not creating our own, not redesigning it all, not trying to set it all up our way. To me, that it just, it makes no sense to me. If you wanted to do that, you might as well stay in the church and keep honoring the church's holidays and holy days and all of that stuff. You might as well do that, because if you're going to set up your own calendar, you're doing the same thing. If you're going to deny the truth that God placed in Judah, you're doing the same thing. You are repeating what the nation of Ephraim did when Ephraim separated from Judah to begin with. So as we come back, let's get rid of that mistake. Return to Adonai our God. Our guilt has made us stumble. Take words, return to Adonai. Say, forgive our guilt, accept what is good. We will pay instead of bulls the offering of our lips. In other words, what we do and what we say must match. I'm not going to look at Asher to save me. We're not going to ride on horses. We're not going to call what we've made with our hands our gods. We're not going to set up our own days. We're not going to set up our own times. We're not going to do it our way. We are going to honor the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by honoring those who have held all of these things, generation after generation after generation after generation. This is a season, the month of Kislev. This is a season where all that is holy gets shaken, okay? We have in the church the big season of Christmas. We have in the Jewish nation the recognition that Jesus wouldn't have been born in December. That makes no sense. We have all of these things that happen in the church, standard church, that are honoring Christmas and in their minds honoring the birth of Yeshua. And we have a whole bunch of people that have come along and said, well, that's pagan, and 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 that's pagan. And yes, some of it has pagan roots, absolutely. Okay? But what doesn't have pagan roots? We have anointing oil over there that we use sometimes when we pray for people, right? That has pagan roots. It's also found in the temple of the holy God of Israel, that there are specific oils that were used for specific things. It's also found in the temple and in the worship of the one true God. Does Hasatan create or make up anything? All he can do is pervert what God has established, because he is not creative. He can only take what God has done and pervert it. Does that mean I'm saying it's okay to set up Christmas trees? That's between you and God. It really is. The passage that's used most often against a Christmas tree is really talking about carving an idol. It's not talking about cutting down a tree and bringing it in and putting gold on it. It's talking about cutting down a tree, breaking its branches, cutting it down, designing it, shaping it into a form, dipping it in gold, and then saying, ha, this is my God. It's creating an idol. In fact, even in Judaism, there's huge argument as to whether or not a Jew can be in the same room with a Christmas tree, because some have said that the Christmas tree is the idol that is talked about in Jeremiah. But most rabbinical sources will say, no, it's not. The Christmas tree is not an idol. Nobody is bowing down to the Christmas tree. Nobody is worshiping the tree. Although there are times I wonder when we sing O Tannenbaum.
Yeah.
And the chorale is singing that one tomorrow in our concert, in German. One of my least favorite songs.
Oh, in German, though.
Huh?
In German.
Yeah, we're singing it in German and then a little in English. And it is beautiful, and it's done very well. And it's going to, the 4-part men's harmony in it is just gorgeous. But anyway, we are not worshiping a tree. And if you want to worship a tree, then you got a problem. But a Christmas tree is not an idol. Some of the things that have been said about all of this stuff come out of one book. Everyone goes back and quotes the one book by Lou White called Fossilized Customs. I have a copy of it if you want to read it. But I want you to know right now he has no historical documentation anywhere in his book. He cannot verify it. He cannot go back and prove any of it. And there are those in historical settings and in the universities and those who have studied out, like the worship of Mithra, who will tell you that Mithra didn't even rise up, was not a god that was being honored necessarily until after Constantine. It's like, what? And we've grown up our whole lives being told all of Christmas is pagan and from pagan roots, and the Catholic Church stole this pagan worship day of Mithra and has turned it into... And you know, there may be some historical truth to that, but half of the stuff we've been told is not proven by the ancient documents. True historians who are digging in and trying to prove it can't. So why are we fighting so hard against something that we have no documentation or proof for? But I will tell you this right now, don't even tell a wicked this. Why? Because you know what? Even the pagans are so convinced that it was a pagan holiday that they will accuse you of trying to steal it again if you tell them, you know what, it really wasn't a big pagan holiday. Saturnalia is not on the 25th. That holiday was a few days before. It's on equinox, right? So, but they are so convinced because it's Encyclopedia Britannica will tell you Christmas was a pagan holiday. Because that's what we have thought for years and years and years and years. But historians doing the research, getting out the documents, looking at the dates of when things happened, are finding it's not quite as historically proven as we've always thought. Rachel steals her father's gods, and we all think it's idolatry. Right? That's what I was taught. That's what it says. She stole her father's gods. Now, if she was stealing those gods to worship them, would she be sitting on them? Think about it. She'd have had to find a different place to hide them because that would have been extremely, extremely, extremely disrespectful in that culture. It would be like throwing a shoe at somebody, and you don't do that in an Arab culture. The sole of your foot or showing the sole of your foot to someone is an absolute insult. It is telling them that they are underneath your feet, you are in charge, and they are nothing but dirt. That's what it means. So to sit on them would have been extreme disrespect if she saw them as gods. But if she recognized them as a sign of inheritance and said, you know what? That inheritance doesn't belong to my brothers. That inheritance belongs to my husband. I'm taking the sign of inheritance, and I'm going to bring it to my husband.
She broke the power of her father's gods by removing them.
That's a possibility too. She obviously didn't think they meant anything in terms of having power over her, or she wouldn't have sat on them. But sometimes we see something and we see it a certain way and we see it that way so long that it's really hard to see anything different. We're coming up on Hanukkah in 2 weeks. It's already only 2 weeks away. And we are in conversation with Moshe over at the Messianic Synagogue, and with Tammy with the For His Glory Apostolic Training Center, and we're going to be doing a Hanukkah, the three of us together at the synagogue downtown. I think it's good for us to honor each other and show honor and work together on what we can work together on. I will not stand up and accuse any Christians of bad theology. I'm not going to stand up and accuse I'm going to be singing with the chorale tomorrow at the stage at Ross Raglan. I'm going to be singing, oh, Christmas tree, oh, Christmas tree. But it talks about what the meaning was that Martin Luther, who is the one who instituted the use of a Christmas tree in Germany, The first one to do it, what Martin Luther says about it, that the cutting it down is akin to God, Christ being sacrificed for us. There's all of these things. These things were meant to teach something, like a catechism teaches things. It wasn't even popular anyplace else for several generations, except in Germany, among the Lutherans, those who followed Martin Luther. Let's not attack those who follow Jesus. Let's not accuse them without understanding. Let's walk in love. How's that for an idea? Novel thought. Let's walk in love. Mason Clover, who's a part of the HR movement, the Hebrew Roots movement, and does music and teaches and is a pastor and all that stuff. And he's been posting all kinds of interesting things that have gotten him in so much trouble on Facebook because he's come out and he said, guys, Christmas isn't as pagan as you think. He just flat out said, Christmas isn't pagan.
Share that with me.
Huh?
Share that with me, I want to see it.
And you should see the attack he's gotten. Everybody, people are quoting Encyclopedia Britannica and he's going, yeah, but there's no sources for that. Go to Encyclopedia Britannica. Read it. And it will say, it is thought that, it is thought that, it is thought that. Where are the historical documents? They aren't there. I've had people leave us because I allowed the use of the name Jesus. Because they believe, and this is something he posted this week that someone else had posted, Jesus is the Antichrist. Jesus means Zeus, son of Zeus. That is the Antichrist. It does not. He is not the Antichrist. Jesus is the English translation of the Latin, which is a translation of the Greek, which is a translation of the Hebrew. It went through all these languages to get to Jesus. The letter J didn't even exist when the King James Bible was first translated, 1611. I can show you, I've got it. Got a copy of it. The letter G didn't exist. It's fairly new in the English language. Yeshua is the Hebrew name. Oh, and then they'll come up with all this other stuff.
Sometimes Christians are the meanest.
Huh?
Sometimes Christians are the meanest.
We are the meanest to each other. In the Hebrew Roots movement, yes. In the Messianic movement, yes. In the Christian world, yes. We tend to be the meanest to each other. And it should not be. Should not be. When Jacob left Laban's house, he made a promise he would not return and do harm to Laban or his family. Ever. That's where all of this is coming back to. Laban is like, the daughters are mine, the children are mine. Don't you do anything wrong to them. This all came from me, Jacob. Do you recognize that? Do not harm that which came from me. And Jacob promises he won't. Here's the witness. I'm not going to pass by this way to do you harm. You're not going to pass by this way to do me harm. Why do we keep crossing the barrier to do each other harm? Why do we do that? Why don't we recognize this all, everything? I mean, it all comes back to something I learned the very first year. Christianity, the church, is where I was born again. Represents my mother in faith. I have to honor her. Judaism is that place that has held on to the tenets, the rules, the regulations, the book, has held on to the truths of the hard word of God, has held on to the festivals, has held on to all of these things. Judaism has done that. In a sense, Judaism has provided all of this. It all came from there, right? And so Judaism is like our father, the provider, the wall, the protector. Why do we dishonor Judaism? Our father. Why do we dishonor the church, our mother? Why can't we recognize that what we have has come from both? That's kind of what Laban is saying. These daughters were mine. Everything that's here, honor it. Treat it with respect. Treat God with respect. God knows where we've come from. He has seen us under the bushes. He's seen us under the trees. He has seen us hiding out, studying. He has seen us learning all this stuff in secret. He knows. And I believe he's going to honor that. Do I see it yet? No. How long did Jacob work for his 2 wives and all the flocks? It wasn't a short time. And it wasn't easy. He labored hard. He labored long. He gave his all, and God honored him. Let's labor long and hard. Let's honor God. I'm going to read the very last verse out of Hosea as a conclusion. Let the wise understand these things. Let the discerning know them. For the ways of the Lord are straight, and the righteous walk in them. But in them, sinners will stumble. Father, help us to walk righteously, not to stumble. Help us to walk in love. Help us to walk in honor. Help us to walk in respect. Help us to go after the blessings that you have promised us, but to do so with honor and respect and hard work that you have called us to do. Father, help us be bridge builders. And give us of your wisdom so that we can recognize, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Yes. Because Jesus was there for a time in his life. Born in Bethlehem, raised in Egypt and in Nazareth, and yet Son of Man, Son of God. You will bring good out of the darkest places. You will bring good out of the least. And I thank you for that. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, our Lord and our Savior.